Because it's we're being removed.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Deborah Scacco, and I am the artist in residence for the City of Santa Monica Public Works Department. And this show is a kind of, I would say, like an edit of some of the things that I've learned over the last couple of years. There's just like too much to possibly put into one exhibition. So yeah, I went more with like a story rather than all the stories, but yeah, and the next couple of months I'll be sort of thinking about how to compile the actual like breadth of the experience. But so thank you for coming. I'm so excited that my dear friend Emma is here with me today. So Emma Robbins and I have known each other for several years now, right?
Almost a decade.
Almost a decade, which is wild. So yeah, and I think like any opportunity that I have to be in dialogue with Emma, I mean, number one, because I love her, but also because she is an extraordinary person. So I invited Emma here today to have a conversation about water justice and what that means, right? So like one of the things about this residency that was extraordinary is I got to go on ride-alongs with sanitation workers and with water workers, and just to kind of witness the people that are a part of this invisible system that keeps a place running, right? And that's really important. And conversations that Emma and I have had over the years were constantly in my mind, right? Because like, I wish I could remember who said this, but I remember reading a quote some time ago that talked about the danger of infrastructure is that it's invisible, right? So like, there's like an assumption that everybody can participate in that infrastructure. There's like an assumption that everyone can participate in that, and also just this assumption that it's going to work, right? And I would say like infrastructural injustice is something that I've been kind of studying for a while and working with a number of community groups and advocates who are doing incredible work, especially in South LA. But it wasn't really until Emma and I just through our friendship and learning about her work with Navajo Water Project, and also like when I had a studio just north of Vernon and I turned the tap on and the water was brown, and it's like, I can buy water, right? Like I have a certain amount of privilege and I can purchase water, but not everybody that lives there can. So that's what we're doing here today. So with that, I'd love to just read Emma's bio because I will forget things and she deserves a grand introduction. So Emma Robbins is a DNA artist, activist, and community organizer. She is the founder and executive director of the Chapter House, an Indigenous arts, culture, and community hub on Tongva land, and the CEO of Planet Women, an organization supporting femme-led conservation and human rights initiatives. For 7 years, Emma served as the founding executive director of the Navajo Water Project at Dig Deep Water. While there, she collaborated with communities on her own reservation to expand access to clean running water to the 1 in 3 Navajo families without it. Emma completed her BFA at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and studied modern Latin American history in Latin American art history in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Her work, exhibited nationally and internationally, addresses issues like broken treaties and the missing and murdered Indigenous people crisis. She's the recipient of the Environmental Leader Award, formerly served on the Arizona Advisory Committee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, and is a senior Aspen Institute Fellow. So thank you, Emma, for being here.
Thanks, Deborah, and thank you to the City of Santa Monica. Love those homies, and thanks everybody for coming out on a Saturday. I always begin by introducing myself in Navajo. I don't know if we have any other Navajos in the audience, but we do it anyway because it really roots us where we're from and who we are, and it's the way that we relate not only to five-finger human beings, or we call them the five-finger beings, but also the earth and animals and our plant relatives. So, She'eya, Emma Robbins, Yinashia, Bilagana Sontana and Ashle, Hashkan Hadzoche, Bashish Chin, Bilagana Sontana Edashache, Adona Kaidene Dashanale, Akot Ego Asana de Neshle, Nane Ahasanet de Nashak, Los Angeles de Shagun. So, the way that we introduce ourselves is we believe that every person has 4 clans, and so it's your mother's clan, your father's clan, your maternal grandfather's clan, and then your paternal grandfather's clan. And we are a matriarchal culture, which is why I'm so bossy. I'm also the oldest daughter and the oldest granddaughter. But the reason why we have our grandfathers and our dad after that is because the mother's clan will always carry on. And so that way it's giving the background of who our whole family is. And you know, my dad's clan is his mom's clan. So it's cool being from a matriarchal culture. It really is. And sometimes I do struggle working with Native peoples who come from patriarchal cultures, and we butt heads a lot, which I'm sure will come up talking about doing water work, because that has happened on other reservations. As was mentioned, I'm from the Navajo Nation. I'm from the western side of the reservation, which has some of the largest contamination of uranium in our water in the entire US. So there are hundreds of abandoned uranium mine lands, and it causes a huge issue when it comes to clean, safe running water and infrastructure. And, you know, that's in addition to water poverty across the Navajo Nation. Has anybody been to the Navajo Nation or the res? Yeah. Yeah. So y'all know it's a huge reservation. The Cherokee and the Navajo constantly fight over who's the largest population. I don't really know, but we're about 400,000 people, and 175,000 people live on the Navajo Nation. If we were a state, we'd be the 10th largest, and we're in 3 different states, Arizona, Utah, and New Mexico. And we have the highest rate of folks without clean running water in their homes. I'm glad that we're talking about sanitation, because it's not always sexy to talk about lack of indoor plumbing, because it means there are no toilets or flush toilets, and that causes a huge issue. But it's important to really understand how large our community is, or how large our reservation is, because it's crazy that we're such a huge land swath and we still don't have a lot of infrastructure. Natives are 19 times more likely to not have running water than other folks, and because of that, it causes a lot of health issues. And we saw this especially during the height of the pandemic, when we had the highest death rate, the highest infection rate, and that meant that, you know, so much of our culture was lost because we lost so many elders. So it's something that water, you know, we all know water is important, but like that is something that was really highlighted over the past few years.
Yeah. And I remember one conversation that we had where you were kind of, this was pre-COVID, but you were raising money for the Navajo Water Project. And you shared with me that like you were making phone calls to ask folks to donate and saying, oh, you know, I'm raising money to connect folks on reservations with running water. And people were like, oh no, everybody has running water. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about trying to just correct the record a little bit, to be like, that's just not true, right? Yeah.
You know, it's strange because some of these conversations really bring out a lot of anger in people, specifically Americans, because that's the exact response that I would get, is meeting with donors or supporters or politicians even. I mean, it is mind-blowing how dumb the government is. I know we're all like probably thinking the same thing right now, but a lot of folks will fight you on it and say that's not true. You know, it's not just the Navajo Nation, but 2.2 million people living in this country don't have clean running water in their homes. And that is insane that we live in the richest country in world history, and there are folks who don't have running water in their homes. And those are only people who are documented and on record. I mean, you know, as you had mentioned, being close to Vernon, I mean, the city of Compton had a huge water issue a couple years ago. Central California has a huge water issue. And it's just something that people don't really talk about. The conversations that I would have, people would constantly respond and say, well, that's just Africa where folks don't have running water. which of the tens of nations in Africa are you talking about? One, and two, there are actually several countries in Africa that have better infrastructure than the US does. But a large part of my job to this day, I still am tied to Dig Deep. I still do a lot of projects for the Navajo Water Project, is about educating people. And educating people in a place where it's not coming from shame, because I truly believe when you're talking about Native issues, it's really sensitive. It can be really hurtful to hear people deny your existence or deny issues like lack of running water. But it's important to come of a place with education, data, but also coming at it with a plan of action. Because we can talk about how people don't have clean running water, but unless we're actually implementing solutions, it doesn't really bring us anywhere. A large issue that many people of color face, but specifically Indigenous folks and Natives in the US, is lack of data. You know, up until several years ago, on the census, there was a question, do you have sanitation or do you have running water? And they removed that. A lot of entities are working on the Navajo Nation, like Indian Health Service, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, then you have state, county, governments, and then obviously the tribal government of the Navajo Nation. And a lot of times what happens is people collect this data, but it never gets back to the community, or things don't really happen with it. And, you know, it's talking about data sovereignty and how that works into educating folks, especially within the US. Sometimes, you know, living, working, and traveling outside of the US, other folks in other countries know so much more about our water issues, which is mind-blowing. So it's important to educate people, and I truly feel that it's important to come at it from a place of wanting to share information versus shaming. Another thing that goes into this type of work and education of others is humanizing Native peoples. Because, you know, last night, I'm still seeing people dress up in Indian costumes. So if you're still dressing up as an Indian, how are you going to humanize someone and understand that they have no clean running water? So that's a big part of what I do as well. And it can really grind you down talking about this, but I think it's something that's super important to be able to speak out and understand the importance of it. Hey, y'all.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I mean, that's something that you saying that has stuck with me over many, many, many years. And so I think, because I remember when I first met you, we met in the context of you being an artist, right? Which of course you are. And Emma is an extraordinary artist. We have worked together a number of times. And I'm just like a super fan of hers on all the fronts. So if you don't know Emma's work, please check it out. But also I remember being like, wait, how do you learn how to run the Navajo Water Project? Like, how does that happen? And you told me a really interesting story about being in Chicago and like the moment that kind of clicked for you. Would you mind sharing that? Because I think it's really special.
Yeah, I mean, y'all heard my bio. I went to art school. It took me 10 years to finish art school. I moved to Argentina to study Latin American art history, specifically during 1976 and 1983 with the last dictatorship in Argentina, where there isn't a very high population of indigenous people, especially in Buenos Aires. So the way that I sort of switched was my dad works a lot in this field as well. He works for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. He's been there for over 30 years, and he works in natural resources and has to educate a lot of folks about water or, oh my God, invasive species. So I will hear about tamarisk and camel thorn forever. It's like, don't get my dad started on that, because you're like, oh my God, like, but that's important when it comes to water. Because what is taking up a lot of water? What is causing issues? So I grew up with these conversations. It's not like it just like came out of the blue. But as I got older and I started to learn a lot more about treaties and thinking about how those affect us as Indigenous peoples every single day, one thing that I kept thinking about was water. And living in Chicago and next to Lake Michigan, it was something that really made me think about Native communities there and what that looks like. And then, living in Buenos Aires, which is a port city, thinking about that as well, like transportation of things. So there were sort of these ideas formulating while I was in Chicago, talking about issues on reservations. And I had read an article about the Navajo Water Project and Dig Deep. And I was like, oh my God, they are going about this the wrong way. They're not consulting community members. They have not talked to NTUA, which is the Navajo Tribal Utility Authority. There's only one tiny utility company on this huge swath of land, like I said. They're overworked, they're underpaid, they're under-resourced. And so that's a huge part of the issue. But, I had started to talk with folks. I was the only Native in my art school. I had maybe 2 other Native friends in Chicago. And it was really hard to be there because there wasn't a lot of community organizing that could happen. So I have a background in the gallery world. And I was at Basel in Miami in December. I don't even know if it's still in December anymore, but it is. Okay. Thinking about leading up to art fairs, I'm like, the trauma. I'm sure others can relate in this room. Unless you're going to like the fun Miami parties, you have a lot of time to think about life while installing work and traveling and kissing rich collector ass. But so I was at Basel and I was at a dinner. And we were having this really boring conversation with some collectors about, well, I'm going to buy this piece, it's a Rashid Johnson, but then we'll wrap it up and let's just wait until it gains value. And I was like, oh my God, this is just really depressing. And I think, at this time there was the King Mine spill, which was when the EPA effed up and a bunch of sludge got into one of our most important rivers, and it was affecting, fish and wildlife, but also our drinking water. So I'm listening to this conversation and I'm just sort of like, I don't really think this job is for me anymore, And prior to that, I had reached out to Dig Deep and I had just said hey, it sounds like y'all could use some help or advice. I'm a res girl. My dad works in this. I have a lot of ties and connections there because I had done some activism on our res prior to that. And Dig Deep had gotten back to me while I was at that dinner. I'm reading my phone and I was like, yes. So they had said, will you come out to LA and talk to us about how we could do better and see if there's room for collaboration. And it was really an aha moment, but I know that's not the case for a lot of people. And, I came out to LA for the first time. I saw that there was Tapatio and Cholula in the little ketchup packets. And I was like, damn, this place is for me. I was coming from Chicago in January. It was nice and sunny and folks were wearing I don't know, sandals and stuff. And I was like, damn, this is really cool. And they just off the bat were like, hey, will you come work for us? And it was a really big move. Part of the reason why I lived in Chicago is because my mom's side of the family is from Chicago. And I had moved back from Argentina to help take care of my grandparents. So I was their caregiver for several years, and decided to up and come out here. And why we were based in LA, I still don't really understand. My boss had said I like the warm weather too. So it does get cold on the res. But the way that I learned so much was really just spending time at Lowe's, spending time at Home Depot, learning water parts. I can tell you all about pecks and shark bites till the cows come home. I can tell you about primary and secondary EPA standards, the differences between Navajo Nation EPA standards, US, Arizona. But I mean, that's really what we need to do. When we talk about data, it's learning what goes into these things and what goes into sanitation, from the smallest shark bite fitting to learning about water policy and water rights and that was something that really was like launching my love, was plumbing. And I still love going into Lowe's when they're like, oh, is your husband here? Do we want to talk to him about it? I'm like, excuse me, I know what an infiltrator is. This artist knows what a shark bite fitting is, you know. I will tell you about 90-degree elbows, sir. But, you know, I think that just shows you that you don't need to become a hydrologist, or you don't need to go to law school to know how to community organize and educate yourself. I mean, it took years. It wasn't an easy thing, but it was just something that I realized I really cared about. So when I left Dig Deep as a full-time employee, the last thing I was working on was the Supreme Court case for the water rights settlement with Arizona versus the Navajo Nation. We lost barely. But since then, there's been a lot of work to have the Navajo Nation get water rights and pushing the federal government to clean up the mines. And so it really started out as this tiny thought of being frustrated by the Rashid Johnson being wrapped up so that it could be valued at a higher price, to Cholula packets, to PVC and PEX, and then, you know, eventually water policy and conservation. So it really was like a journey, but I think that's something that I always tell people on the res, because no matter what reservation you're from or what tribe or indigenous nation, I think all of us sort of have this longing and want to go home and help our people. And I didn't think art at the time was going to do that, but, you know, we can talk a bit more about how I've progressed, but it's interesting. And I think, again, this all started from treaties. So I always encourage everyone to read the treaties and whose land you're on and figure out how that plays into modern infrastructure and the lack of it on a lot of reservations.
Yeah, I feel like I should just drop the mic and leave right now. Yeah, there's so much in there. And I think so this is one of the reasons why I love talking with you is, and I think, so number one, the first time that Emma and I worked together, it was in a show at Descanso Gardens, and I was working with another artist who was actually making a sculpture that involved plumbing. So it was like a very organic way to learn how much Emma loves plumbing and how she really does know a lot about it. Cause I would be like, oh, the pump's not working, what do I do? And of course I would call Emma because she knows. So, but also the fact that like, you learned this, right? It's not always about like going to school for mechanical engineering. It's not about like getting a PhD somewhere. All those things are fine. Mm-hmm. But like one of the things that I've always really admired about you is kind of you see something that needs to be done and you're like, oh yeah, I should just do that, right? Which is really special. Thank you. And with that, so I want to talk about the chapter house in a minute, because that's another thing that you just did, which is pretty amazing. But I want to just acknowledge, so like during COVID, we were all just like trying to survive COVID, right? And like I obviously knew that you did this work and knew that you were traveling and would occasionally be like, you okay? You know? But I just remember kind of looking at the news and seeing Emma's face on Democracy Now! Talking about COVID and how it impacts reservations. And so I wonder, like, if you don't mind just talking about that experience for a minute, because I feel like you went from, obviously, like, you do a lot of public engagements, clearly, right? And with good reason, because you're awesome. And it's like going from being the person that's like doing the work to all of a sudden being like, oh, I'm the person who's the expert on what needs to be done, and thinking about all of the learning from people saying, oh no, that's only in Africa, right? Like, how did you feel a bridge between those two things? And just in general, like, how did you approach being a kind of water advocate for First Peoples during COVID?
Yeah, I mean, the experience of being, like, I say this jokingly because that's not your question, but like being on Democracy Now!, love Amy Goodman, love that reporting. It was funny because our press people were like, I really think we were, it was COVID and I was being interviewed at home in my home office. I think our house was like 600 square feet, my husband and I and 2 dogs. And they were like, the art on your refrigerator, which was always my background, it's too political. And I was like, do you know what Democracy Now! Is? Like, Jesus Christ. But yeah, it was a wide range of people that we were talking to. And, you know, like I said, with the pandemic and the Navajo Nation having the highest death rate and the highest infection rate at one point, it was really urgent to get the word out. But guess what? We don't have running water when it's a pandemic or not. And that was really the message to drive home, was saying to folks, like, it's not just, oh, these poor natives right now, people are dying, you know, this is just like something we're going to highlight. Okay, now we're going to move on to something else. It was really encouraging people to build relationships and to be there and to make sure that they're returning 6 years later to report on what's going on, or 6 months or 6 weeks. I mean, it was, with interviews, there was like such an intense moment where it was like every day, like, talk about this. And it also made me really sad to just see that it was like a short time where people gave a shit, excuse my language. But it is nice because even like my friends in Argentina, they were like, oh my God, I saw you on like AJ Plus Spanish version. And like, you know, like, it was nice to see that the word really was getting out to a large audience. But it was sort of frustrating. And apart from that, there were a lot of human rights groups that came out to the Navajo Nation. I remember having a conversation with an org who was like, I don't understand why you're taking so long with doing this project. And, you know, you should be out there doing this. And I was like, excuse me, who are you? You've been here for about 5 minutes. Like, I'm from the reservation, and it's about building relationships and understanding who the elder is in the community that you should talk to. You know, I mentioned I'm from the western side of the reservation. That doesn't mean that I know everyone in this size of Ireland land mass. So that's a big part of my job as well, was going in and talking to people and figuring out what worked for the community and working with the community, not for them. So yeah, I mean, it was exciting. I think my favorite press thing that I did was I got to be on, it was like WAPO Live, Washington Post Live, with the former Navajo Nation president. The current Navajo Nation president is garbage, but that's a whole other thing. I hope you're getting this on video, how I feel. But, you know, it was really cool to collaborate with people like Jonathan Nez and think about how to help folks. A large part of what I ran into on the res too is people who had been working in the tribal government for a while would come up to me and be like, you know, this project's not going to work. And they, like, the chapter, which we'll talk about what chapters are, but I mean, basically the Navajo Nation is broken up into what are called chapters, and that's where the chapter house gets its name, which I know we'll touch on. But we would work with chapters, which are local government, but it's also a community space where people come together. And we would, you know, rehab wells, remediate them, put new pumps in, build new tanks, whatever we needed. And so we would try and hand them back to the chapters so that they could own and manage it. And so a lot of folks would come up and say that. And I was like, ugh, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, I'm this like young pup at the time, young pup. And like, I know this will work. And it didn't work. And that was really hard to kind of go back and be like, well, what would you do? And, you know, but there were a lot of humbling moments. It's not just like coming in and knowing everything and learning about, you know, plumbing parts. But it was really hard during the pandemic to do this work, and being in LA and, you know, driving back and forth to the reservation, which is 9 hours away where I'm from, and then having to quarantine and make sure my dad was safe and make sure that I wasn't being irresponsible and going out. So I think, like, for everyone, it was pretty lonely because it was making sure that we were taking care of relatives. And at the time I was pregnant with my 4-year-old, now 4-year-old. And I had such bad morning sickness and like driving there and then having to haul around heavy tanks. And it was just like, it was really hard. So there were some highlights and fun parts. And then also, just like everyone else, really lonely and depressing parts too. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to bring that up also because for a couple of reasons. One is that I think when I think about water politics and when I think about, you know, the ongoing impacts of treaties and like just basic environmental justice issues, it is like it's a kind of slow violence that doesn't have a starting point or an end point because we don't know when it starts, right? And so I remember seeing you in your interviews during the pandemic thinking like, I hope that this goes towards us recognizing that like the pandemic doesn't stop when the pandemic stops, right? Like the fires are not out just because the fires stop burning. Like people are still dealing with a lack of access. People are still dealing with like not having clean water, with like not having full sanitation after, as you say, like after the reporters leave, right? And so I felt excited to see you on there just to like make people think, like you spoke so beautifully about that as you did now, of saying like, but there wasn't running water before now. Like this is not a new thing. It's just now we have a new need that makes it even more dangerous than it was before. So yeah, so I just appreciated that. Like it was exciting to kind of hear you vocalize that. And so like, I want to talk about something now that I think is connected to that, which is the chapter house, right? And again, like we've known each other for a minute now, and I remember when we met, you being like, I think like I need to start something. And I was like, all right, you do you know? And then all of a sudden there's a 501c3 and you have a space and like, and so I will let you talk about the chapter house, obviously, but I will just say again, like if you are not familiar, I cannot encourage you enough to just like go to an event, to just hang, right? Because it is just like one of the most joyous, funny, like insanely talented, soulful groups of people that I have ever gotten to be around. So you should introduce.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And like shout out to 2 chapter house community members that we have here who live on the east side and drove out here to the west side. But I shout out B and Mazos because it's something where it's important to understand that it's not just me who started this or me who's doing this work. It's other Indigenous community members who are out there doing it. So what we're the chapter house. As I mentioned, the Navajo Nation's broken up into 110 chapters. What a chapter is akin to is sort of like the Navajo Nation would be its own country. There are things called agencies, and those are sort of like counties. And then within that are chapters, and those are sort of like townships. And then within a chapter, there are like small, tiny, tiny towns. And chapter houses were a really big part of my life, my entire life. Firstly, because my dad was a local politician and I would get dragged every Sunday to every chapter meeting. And at the time I was like, oh my God, I hate this so much. I should be like out at like Kaylin's house, you know, doing whatever. But it was so formative for me to be there and to see community coming together, not just politically to make decisions, but it was food distribution, it was cultural events, it was language classes, it was community walks. And during the pandemic, you know, that carried on where we saw vaccine distribution, mutual aid distribution. But it was just like a really fun community to go to. And the chapters aren't just like, you know, like I said, like the township, it's actually a physical building. And so, you know, working again on these clean running water projects, I spent so much time in these the chapter houses as well. If you want to get something done, man, chapter managers are the people that you need to befriend. And it's true. I mean, again, really thinking about how to work with the community. So I mentioned in Chicago, I knew about like 3 other natives. And coming to LA in 2016, I was like blown away at how many natives were here and how many indigenous people, both, you know, so-called American Indians, but then also global indigenous folks as well from other countries and other parts of the Americas. And I traveled so much for work at the beginning. I was in LA probably like a week out of the month. And it wasn't like a full week. It was like 2 days and then I'm here and then I have to fly somewhere. I have to drive back to the res. And it was a lot, and I felt like I only got to see like a glimpse of my Native friends. And then, obviously in 2016 with Standing Rock and Dapple, I got to see friends so often because we'd come together to march and we'd come together in that way out of protest. But it was sort of like when that ended, it was like, well, where do we go? And what do we do now? And I guess I'll see you at the next protest. And I was living in Mid-City at the time, and I would go to a lot of events at the Underground Museum. Shout out to the UM, one of the best arts locations. I know they're closed now, but it was super formative. And I know that the UM described themselves as a Black space, welcoming all. And I was like, ooh, what if we did a Native space welcoming all? And became friends with the people who were working there, their board members, Noah's brother, Khalil, which was really fun, Anye. And we actually hosted an event there where it was the concerned citizens of South Central LA and then people from the Navajo Nation. And we got to talk about our water issues and solutions. And so being welcomed by that community in that space, that was sort of the catalyst to starting the chapter house. Thinking about coming together not only in protest, which is important, but also out of community care and Native joy, and really embracing urban natives, what we call urban natives, and then those of us from the reservation, and people who are reconnecting, which means folks who might not have been as privileged to grow up in a Native household or in a Native community. A lot of what I personally see in LA is sometimes there can be this sort of like infighting with, well, they're Native, but they're from this part, or, it's not about us who are within the US or Canada. And we really exist to also break that down, because however you identify in your indigeneity, you're welcomed at the chapter house. If you're an ally, you're welcomed at the chapter house. But everything we do is centered around indigiqueerness, indigenous joy, and community care. So what we do is, up until the end of August, we had a 2,800 square foot space in Echo Park. We've since moved, and a lot of that had to do with, there's so many jokes that can be made around this, but basically the landlord did not honor our treaty-like agreement. And there was a retaining wall coming down, and it was just not a good fit anymore. And then he ended up dying and the building got sold. There's a lot of exposure therapy there because I drive by that space 4 times a day and I'm always like, motherfucker. But now we're looking for a new space. So if you know of a space on the Northeast side that's under $10,000 and about 3,000 square feet with an outdoor space and parking, please hit me up. But now we're doing what we did in the beginning, which is pop-up events, and we partner pretty heavily with the Broad. We just did something with the Getty. So we work with larger institutions, and that's always fun because it's like bringing awareness to Native peoples in these spaces. Did anyone see Jeffrey Gibson's exhibition? Yes. Okay. So glad. But we did a lot of programming with them, and I helped co-curate the opening night. If you were there, I had just had my second baby and had preeclampsia and was in the hospital, so didn't get to go. But I don't usually have FOMO, but I had a lot of FOMO that night. As I was lying there with a magnesium drip, I was like, why? But, that's what we do, is bringing Natives front and center, and really, yeah. There we go. Doing that where we can put ourselves front and center and let people know that we're still here. And it gets back to that idea of humanization, and showing people that we're not just this monolith, we're not a mascot, we're not all from the same tribe. Recently I was with a friend who's Lakota, and we were looking at a space. I mean, we're going hard with searching for spaces, and there were some folks there who were showing it, and they were like asking her all the questions about being Navajo. And she's like, I don't know how many times I can tell you I'm from a different tribe. If it's not like helicopters with police, it's, I guess we're near the airport. I can't talk too much trash, but Oh, it's the mic is for the yeah. It feels like it should work, but like externally to everyone. But yeah, we're a 501c3. We literally became a nonprofit on March 15th, 2020. So the dream of bringing people together, I know, moved to online. So a few examples of what we do is we host art exhibitions. Our first exhibition was with Kimberly Robertson, who made my earrings. A few people have asked about it. She's an amazing Muskogee artist. We also host free yoga classes that are taught by a Diné teacher as well. For those of you who don't know, you'll hear Diné and Navajo. They're the same thing. Diné is in our language. Navajo is technically a Spanish word. So we also do an annual native drag show, which is really fun. This year we're pushing it to January because of the lack of space. We also do drag story hour. We do community walks. We do beading workshops. And so it's again getting back to this idea of what a chapter house was for me personally. The one event that I really want to plug is on December 13th. We have our third LA Indian flea market. And that's modeled after flea markets on different reservations. So we started out with 15 vendors last December. And this year we're going to have 40. And we also have community resources and other nonprofits who are doing work, not only for Native peoples, but like we had the Friends of the LA River there. And it's really fun because people come out. Like I think last time we had 500 people come out. And like where in LA can you go to buy Native art? So when we get our new space, we're also going to open up a storefront for folks to sell their work there. This can't leave the room. But I'm actually leaving my day job and starting to work full-time on the chapter house. So it's going to be exciting.
We gotta applaud.
Yeah, it's a big thing. It's a big thing. Yeah. It's not that scandalous that I can't leave the room, but it's something that has always been a dream of mine because now I want to dedicate my life to working with Native peoples just in a different way. Like I said, I still do some work for Dig Deep. I just signed a contract with Indian Health Service to actually help with communication around water systems. Working with Indian Health Service engineers is a weird one, and I don't think they get my humor. I think y'all seem to. But yeah, it's something that's super exciting. And again, like having 2 community members here means a lot because we're like a staff of 2, literally. I've been an unpaid employee for 5 years now, but we couldn't do it without people who are coming out. And it is really cool to see people own the space and own these projects and own just a piece of the Indigenous joy and spreading it and uplifting one another. And I guess sort of the last thing I'll say here is we've started doing some of our own philanthropy and fundraising. So during the LA fires, we raised almost $15,000 and distributed that to folks who are working with Indigenous, Filipino, Black, and Latinx communities. And that was really important. B and I went and made, everyone will fight me on this and say it's an Indian taco. It is a Navajo taco. We made Navajo tacos for the tribal firefighters, and that was really amazing. And so there were some huge fires this summer on the Navajo Nation. We raised some funds for that. We've done some stuff with Cheerla, which is really cool. And just thinking about now our immigrant relatives, and especially Indigenous immigrant relatives, and the idea of no ban on stolen land, but the border crossed us. We didn't cross the border, So that's what we do. And it's really fun because like I mentioned, have a 4-year-old and she's like so involved. We joke that she's the director of hospitality because she loves putting out snacks, and, my dog's like the resident res dog. So it's just really fun. And it's been a journey thinking about working with Native communities when it comes to running water. And during that path, realizing that there's just a really important element of coming together, not in those moments of crisis like the pandemic, or not in the moments of needing clean running water, but just taking care of one another in other forms. Yeah.
That's so awesome.
Yeah. Thank you.
I feel like maybe that's like a good point to just move to questions,
Yeah.
right? And also, I just want to congratulate you again on.
Oh, thank you.
Because, I mean, since we've known each other, you have always been an artist. You've become a mom of 2 children.
Yeah.
You started the Chapter House, like obviously with folks who are critical, but like you're still doing it,
Yeah.
right? Plus you have your own studio practice, plus you have always had a full-time job. So like, please go on vacation before you do anything.
No,
it's like what I'm gonna say.
Coffee of the day, and I'm already plotting the third one.
Yeah.
But yeah. No,
so
thank you.
yeah, but I also just feel, because I just learned that news this morning, so I'm really excited that you shared that, because I was finding it hard not to want to just like shout it from the rooftops.
Oh, I know.
It's so
I'm
exciting.
so excited.
Yeah.
I know. I was like, when it has nothing to do with the org. They're great. Like I love them. It's been a good journey. It's been 2 years. But you know that like Johnny Paycheck song? Yeah. Take this job and shove it. I ain't working here no more. I was like wanting to say it so badly, but again, I'm like, the org's fine. They're not like bad people. They're doing great work, but you know.
Yeah. Well, with that, does anyone have any questions for Emma? Or? Oh yes, where is your flea market going to be?
It'll be at the Broad. So outside of it, they sent over the like, it's not a floor plan because it'll be outside, but you know, they said the PDF said the Olive Garden, and I like could not stop laughing, and they were like, "No, it's the Olive Garden." I was like, "Are you like including bread and salad?" Like, yeah, the breadsticks. Yeah, you know. But yeah, it'll be outside, and then all of our fleas so far have included a comedy show afterwards. So, you know, we're always bringing native humor into it. Jana Schmeeding, who's probably our closest collaborator at this point, of Reservation Dogs and Rutherford Falls, and she has an amazing podcast called Sage Based Wisdom. I highly encourage you to check it out. She generally hosts a comedy show afterwards. So in the evening time, there will be the comedy show inside the Oculus Hall, which is like the second floor of the museum. Yay, Najoni's here. The other half of the Chapter House. Hey, Zen. Yeah. So yeah, it's gonna be fun. And then, you know, our hopes are to have a new space in January. It's taking longer than I wanted it to, and it's hard, yeah, to have that like pause. Like I feel like we're like sleeping on someone's couch, and you're kind of like, I'm a little too grown. I want to have a nice hotel. You know, I don't want to move back into my parents' house or whatever the feeling is. But yeah, just keep an eye out. Our Instagram's probably the best thing to follow. And it'll be, I think, 11 to 5 is the market. Najoni, is it? Where is Najoni? Oh, 11 to 5? Okay. 10 to 5. And then the comedy show's 7 to 8. 7 to 8:30. Y'all, this is Najoni. She is our social media and comms person, fellow Navajo, and just overall baddie, who also actually has worked in water. So, yeah. I've never really thought about how we both started in water and then moved to this. So, yeah.
So yeah, everybody, the 13th is your day. Any other questions? Yeah. Go ahead. I was pointing for. Oh, okay.
I'm curious, when you were talking about kind of working with chapter elders and as a young pup, and they're like, this isn't going to work, and it's not work.
Sorry.
Going back to when you were talking about working with chapter elders for the recording, as a young pup, and they were like, this isn't going to work, and you were like, it's going to work, and then it didn't work. Like, what didn't work? And kind of from that experience now, what do you think are like the biggest issues that are happening, and like what are the solutions that you think could be possible?
No, that's a really good question. I mean, I was like humbled. Like the specific person, her name is Bitta Becker. This is not me calling her out. This is me shouting her out. Bitte Becker is someone who I like deeply admire. So let me just start out with that. It was like me like being a super fan. She had worked with my dad for years. I think she used to run some big segment of like the California EPA. So like she's worked on the res for the federal government, for the state government, does some amazing work with universal access to water for tribes specifically. And, you know, she was not polite at all. Now she's like a really good friend of mine. But at the time she was like, basically like, this is dumb. I don't know why you're trying this. And I remember getting out of the meeting and just being like, calling my dad, like tearing up, like, oh my God, Bitte Becker just said this to me. And my dad being like, I mean, she probably knows what she's talking about. And me being like, okay, bro, like kick me while I'm down, Jesus. But what didn't work was transferring the ownership of this well to a government, the tribal government, the chapter government, which just wasn't ready to do it. You know, one thing that people don't factor in these projects oftentimes is O&M, or operation and maintenance. So you can have the best intentions and say like, hey, here's this well to this community, and they don't have the money. They don't have an operator. There's a huge shortage of plumbers on the Navajo Nation. I think we have like 2 certified plumbers on our entire reservation, at least as of a couple years ago. If you want to make money, be a plumber on a res. I'm serious. And it didn't work. And it was like taking that lesson in the way where, oh, now I need to think about O&M, and I need to equip people and make sure that we're not just handing something over. You know, we see a lot of technology that in theory is really great, but doesn't work on the Navajo Nation. Hydro panels, why would you ever install a hydro panel in a desert climate? I mean, it's something that in theory is great to take water from the air and give people water, drinking water, but I mean, it's hot, it's dry, that's not going to happen. And so those are the types of projects where it's like thinking in the long term, like many of us Native peoples talk about 7 generations ahead. And so, you know, from there on out, it was thinking like, well, how do we partner with other folks who would be able to manage this well or these water systems, and do it in a way that it's for the community and consulting the community. And even now it's just really hard, where it's like, I don't want to be the leader of a nonprofit and be in charge of this well that isn't on my land. It's somebody else. But it's like, we need to equip people and we need to give them the money. I mean, money is like the answer to like 99% of things, but it takes a lot to monitor a well. And when it's a community well, you have to do a lot of testing. You got to report those findings back. So it was educating myself to find the solution about the long term. Yeah. And becoming friends with Bitte Becker. Yeah. Who will actually, I'll see her next week because I'm co-organizing the Women in Water Convening, which is for femmes who are working specifically on the Colorado River and projects there. And so it's really exciting. I started this 3 years ago. This is our 3rd annual, and it's just like a nice time. It's going to be on my own reservation. And we have about 110 people coming, and it's really cool to like meet up with the Bitte Beckers and the young pups who are going to get advice along the way. Yeah.
I'd love to just kind of follow up on that in that. So, because you were with Navajo Water Project for 7 years, mm-hmm. right? And you went through like some very tough years with them. Are you like, how is improving access to water doing? Like, how, like, is it, would you say the work is at the same pace? Is it like, are the funds there? Is the will there? I guess just like, how's it going is a very big question to ask, but one that feels important.
Yeah, I mean, the funds are there. Like, my project got $17 million from Mackenzie Scott. So we started out with, I'm not like trying to shout out like Bezos or any of, his money related to that. But I mean, it's better that people put that money towards these projects, you know, and definitely, I guess, like, you know, I feel like it's been a little vague, like the type of work that I do, but, or, you know, continue to do and did, but what we would do is we would install off-grid water systems for people who just could not access piped water. I mean, so many people are spread out from one another. It doesn't make sense to connect piped water to one home for millions of dollars. But we can do off-grid systems that bring that water into homes. We also did water delivery, and then folks who were close to pipe systems, we could just tap into that. And then building, you know, sanitation, so like toilets, or figuring out what that would look like to have a flush toilet either inside their home or outside. And so it's really figuring out how to model or how to implement what works for everyone, because everyone's situation is unique. And so in terms of off-grid, you know, when I started out, I left Dig Deep 2 years ago as the ED of the Navajo Water Project. And when I started out, we had done one. And when I left, it was like 700. So, you know, during the pandemic, ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan, and then CARES, I don't remember what CARES stands for, but some sort of money. There was a lot of that went into infrastructure. And so things are improving on a federal level, at an NGO level. People are getting a lot more running water. A lot more data is being collected. Shout out to Johns Hopkins Health Center for Indigenous Folks. That's not the actual name, but it's some of those words in there. But they're doing like amazing work when it comes to data collection. And so what we've seen, and this really happened during the pandemic, was all these entities who weren't working together came together and were sort of like, I still sit on these calls, the WACG, Water Access Coordination Group, and it was nice to see people say like, well, I'm gonna take this puzzle piece and put it here. So things are improving, the funds are there. One thing that we've seen is a lot of WASH, or water, sanitation, and hygiene organizations who were only working internationally are now working domestically or on sovereign tribal nations. So it's been good to see people shift their mindset from only working in Africa to being in the US. Yeah, like Water for People, they were only doing international projects. Now they're working in the US. I mean, everyone knows who Water for People is. Everyone working in water knows who Water for People is.
That's really exciting to hear. Thank you. And yes, question.
Sure. I have a question about where the water sources are and how accessible they are for the population.
Yeah, so the Navajo Nation is close to the Colorado River and the Little Colorado River, the San Juan River, and other little tributaries in there. We also have different aquifers. So sometimes you'll hear it called the N aquifer, which is the Navajo aquifer. There's actually like a lot of water close or on the res. The thing is, we don't own water rights to it. So we can't always tap in. And that's something like with, you know, Arizona or California, us included here, we're taking all this water and we're taking it away from other folks. I'd love to find this statistic, but it is with the Universal Clean Water Access for Tribal Nations that did an economic study. And I don't know the exact number, so I don't want to throw out some random piece of misinformation, but it's basically like tribal nations, our water rights like basically don't exist, one. And two, when we do pay for our water, like the actual tribal utility companies, it is so high compared to what cities or non-native households pay for. So there is actually a lot of water. We just oftentimes can't access it. But, you know, a couple years ago, I was on the Colorado River. And has anybody done the Colorado River before? No? I highly encourage it. You did. It's like life-changing. But it's super impactful because you can see like tens of feet that the Colorado River has gone down. And it's so jarring to even see those marks. You start to realize like the Navajo Nation doesn't have access to this water, very quickly California won't have access to this water. Arizona won't have access to this water. Utah, who cares about them? But I'm just kidding. Love Utah. You can do no wrong. Just kidding. No, but like the Southwest will run out of water. And we've seen it across the world, and we see it in major metropolitan areas happening. So that's where we access our water from. It's just we're constantly in water rights settlements, and they last for years. And it's just something where a lot of times when the government changes or administrations change, the sort of sentiment is like, whatever, it's their problem next. But a lot of water sources that we have, there is uranium contamination in it. And it's generally not in piped water. It's in water that people are accessing from wells themselves. And a lot of times people access water from livestock wells because they just don't have access to anything else. My grandmother died of stomach cancer from exposure to uranium in water. And so that was sort of how like everything started for me in terms of educating myself at 14. But yeah, it's something where, it actually wouldn't cost that much money to get everyone on the Navajo Nation water or, other parts of the US, but we got to figure it out. Yeah. I don't remember what it is, but I definitely want to find the economic study. But I mean, it's not like trillions, it's like in the lower billions. And that's not a lot of money. If we can ship that to other countries for wars, like why can't we put that back into water infrastructure and tribal nations? Yeah.
Maybe a decade and a half ago, about water that in, I forget what year it was, maybe it was like 2040 or 2030, which is 40, that 40% of Americans wouldn't be able to afford their water bill. And I'm really worried about living in Los Angeles. We're in a desert.
So just for the recording, so the comment was about a study that said that, I'm sorry, can you repeat the percentage? Dr. Alachi.
At that time, I don't know what I think it was the president or CEO of JPL at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he said. He was like, people were debating, like, was global warming happening?
And sorry, was it 40% of?
40% of Americans won't be able to afford their water bill.
Okay. Yeah. So the statistic is that 40% of Americans wouldn't be able to afford their water bill by 2040, which I don't find surprising at all, actually. And I think that maybe that's just because, like, I work in water. I live among water people, right? So like these are statistics that we kind of study and discuss often because they are very real. And what I will say is I thank you for bringing up the issue of uranium in water, because I think it also, I mean, obviously it's a critical issue and it's all connected, right? So to kind of like circle back to the work that you make about treaties, it is all connected. So it's not, and I think that's like a big part of this entire project. That's a big part of like everything we've been talking about for 10 years, right? That there is no, you can't isolate water justice from sanitation, from immigration, from, colonization. Like it just continues to reverberate. And I think one of the things that I appreciate about all of the work you do is I think that it makes access to that history so much more accessible for folks without feeling necessarily ashamed of not knowing it. I think it's shameful that we don't know it, but we should not be ashamed for not knowing it, because that is by design, right? So so I think, and these kinds of studies that make us realize that this is also like access to clean water is not just an issue on the res, right? It's an issue in the inner city. It's an issue. It's like what's happening in Flint, Michigan. I don't know is the answer, because we moved on, right? So again, it's this kind of like slow violence. It's the kind of, oh, this is important today, and then the news cycle changes. And we can't worry about everything all the time. That's not like a healthy way to be in the world. But I think I love seeing like your trajectory and how it continues to cycle back into just basic human rights, ultimately, especially on the reservation.
No, I totally agree. And like two things that I want to encourage folks in this room to do are Oklahoma State University has digitized almost every single treaty signed between the federal government and tribal nations within the U.S. So I would definitely check that out. I would also check out the 18 Lost Treaties of California, which a lot of my artwork is about, because does anyone here know about the 18 Lost Treaties? So the 18 Lost Treaties were signed between tens of tribes and the federal government. So a lot of times the federal government would group like multiple tribes together and sign treaties. And, California has so many tribes, but there's so many tribes here that aren't federally recognized. And a lot of that is a result of these 18 Lost Treaties. The reason why they're called Lost Treaties is because, at the time, what they would call Indian agents would sign this with people in the tribes, and they were handed over to the Senate, and the Senate was supposed to ratify them, and they never did. And they were like, oh, we don't know where they are, so we don't have to honor them at all. And in like 1934, someone found them locked away in a Senate desk, and they were just like, well, whatever, we don't have to do anything about it. And because of that, people were forcibly removed from their land and promised all these things like, food, access to water, access to healthcare, access to education. And it's not like that basic where it's like, oh, you get all this stuff and we get your land. Obviously not like that. But because of that, there's erasure of culture, of language. A lot of tribes didn't survive that. And look up those two things, treaties, 18 Lost Treaties. The Smithsonian has also digitized them, where you can actually see like the writing of it. And if you check out my artwork, a lot of what I make in my artwork is X's, and that's because treaties were signed with X marks, because many of us didn't speak English and we didn't even know what we were signing most of the time. And the other thing that I'll encourage you to look up is the Owens Valley. LADWP owns 95% of the Owens Valley, where the Numu or the Numu, why can't I think of the English name? Paiute, yeah. Well, Owens Valley Paiute, yeah. Bishop Paiute, excuse me, yeah. I was just on their reservation a couple weeks ago, and I met with their council, and they told me about a movie called Paya, and it talks about basically the water wars with LADWP and their tribe. So strongly recommend that. And it's sort of like a full circle, because their water commissioner called me the other day and said, like, I heard that you met with our council and we really want to see how we can work with you to educate urban natives and allies specifically about these water issues. I don't know if anyone's ever been to Bishop. Yeah, like you can see the freaking water line. Like that is mind-blowing to me that we're taking water from a place that's 4 hours away. Although it took me like literally 7 hours to drive with my children there, but.
Well, yeah. and with that, I mean, I think that kind of brings us right back to this project in a way, right? Because a part of what I spent last year doing is making this map of water in Santa Monica. And I mean, we also talk a lot about maps, right? Yeah. And so, and again, all connected, like treaties, ratification, access to land, access to water, it's all like solidified, for lack of a better term, in cartography, right? And so, and also because water is so complex, and even just like you giving us a very understandable view of like going off grid and not, you know what I mean? Like those are like very physical lines that I can picture in my head. But even here as the resident artist over 2 years, I'm still so confused by how things happen, right? And maybe it's just like I'm not wired properly, but and it's like I'm working with the like amazing, very sweet, like really they speak in plain English, like they're not using hydrological language, but in drawing the map, I was just like, oh my God, my head's gonna explode. This is so much information, right? And so the map that's in that room is a map of the water system of Santa Monica. And what you'll notice is that the wells are actually outside the city, right? Not far outside, not like Owens Valley to LA outside, but they're outside of the city boundaries. And the reason why LA turned down this is my understanding, the reason why LA didn't purchase those wells is because we just opened the LA aqueduct. And we're like, no, we're good. Mulholland got us, right? And so because of that, Santa Monica is a city with our water sources outside of the city itself. And so it's just really interesting. Like a big part of all of this is like, there is no away. There is no like, and all of our water is connected as well, right? So, you know, if folks on the reservation don't have access to that water, that aquifer is being sucked dry by other uses, right? And so this idea of like thinking about the ways in which it's connected, but also understanding we're all taking water from somewhere else, right? And so like the more, because I've been working in water issues, I'm an artist, right? Like I'm not a scientist, I'm not a hydrologist, I'm just like a very concerned citizen. And I've been working on this for over 15 years now. And it just doesn't get any clearer because it's like it's like when you unpeel the onion, it never stops peeling because everyone is taking from somewhere else, which means that those systems are genuinely interconnected in a way that I don't know that we can understand completely, because then you're in other municipalities, other districts. I mean, even in Santa Monica, it's a small percentage, but you know, as a backup, there is water from the municipal water district, which is the Colorado River, right? And then that is also tied into the California aqueduct and the Los Angeles aqueduct. And then all of a sudden you're at this like national scale of infrastructure. So I just think yeah. The other thing I'll just add about that, like, I feel like when we talk about water, I had never talked about it as an extraction, but of course it is, right? Like we get our water from underground. We hit a water table, we dig a well, right? So like this behind us is actually clay, or it's earth, I should say, from well N22, and at the top is at 10 feet and at the bottom is 500, right? With the idea of like, again, all of our everything collects in the soil, collects in the water, and then we're extracting that earth in order to hit the water table, right? So I guess with that, I would just like say everything is connected. And I think your work proves that in so many different ways. Again, I would really encourage folks like follow the chapter house, support them any way you can. A lot of people just like in like very political times always ask, what can I do? And I always say just like whatever the chapter house is doing, or just give them money if that's what you can do, you know? So yeah, I just appreciate you kind of your work and your leadership and just like setting up a space where, yeah, like I always learn from you. So thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for always giving the chapter house stuff to do and whatever you're doing. I'm super appreciative of it and really happy to be here with everybody. Yeah.
All right, so with that, we'll close out. Thank you so much, Emma. Thank you everybody for coming and sharing your Saturday with us.